everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst radio network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Find them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at ArtistFirst.com. Now here they are, Margaret and Michael Lyons.
Thank you very much, Z-Man. Yes, you've entered into the realm of the soul of the everyman,
where the suffering never stops. And I'm Michael Lyons. Speaking of suffering.
And I'm Margaret.
That's it, folks.
Suffering now ends.
We got nothing. No, do we have anything?
What?
Wondering if you had anything. Yes, tonight we do have something. But you're on the hook. You introduce the thing.
All right. Well, we decided that the topic of suffering and how it affects us all is an appropriate topic for this evening. In fact, every religion pretty much says that suffering exists. The one thing that all humans will agree on. So with Buddha, that was his basic statement, that all life is suffering, which I think would probably need to see it in, how you translate it into the original language to see if it was translated well into English.
Was it Sanskrit? I guess so, right?
Yes, it could be.
Or some ancient Hindi, who knows?
But understanding that you've entered a realm of challenges. Maybe that's the best way to express that. And challenges mean that you will be in conflict with some of the experiences that you have down here. And that conflict leads to the state of suffering. Why? Because your suffering has to do with the things and the stories that you've told yourself, how things are supposed to be. We get annoyed or upset whenever things go awry from what we believe we've planned out or think we understand, and it doesn't do that. So then suddenly we go into, why? Why isn't it that way? And Tolle was rather concise in the way he had done this. He basically said, do not believe every thought in your head.
Well, actually, we have a quote. Eckhart is our muse again tonight because he's one of our favorites.
Well, I'm just saying that this is the foundation of it. Understanding that the foundation of suffering comes from when things are not what you think they are.
Well, I mean, I think there's two things there that you very succinctly laid out. That suffering, first of all, is chosen. And second of all, often the root of suffering is expectations rather than the actual reality.
Well, it's chosen expectations. Maybe that should be clarified.
Right. Well, what you said, which I believe is exactly that, is that when you've imagined a particular outcome, you expect it to go some way, or you planned something, and the planning part of your brain, the planning part of your persona, has said, well, this and this and this are going to happen, and I'm going to have these things, and this is what's going to come of them, and these are what people are going to think of me, and all this other. So there's this whole, let's say, expectation, this sort of imaginary universe. And then reality intrudes. And for one reason or another, that does not happen. And so what the ego does is it resists. It says, well, why? As you just said, why? Why me? Why is it happening to me? Why can't I have this white thing and that white thing? I did all the stuff. I put in all the time. I put all the cookies in the slots. Why? And so there's two direct sources of suffering there. One was the fact that reality didn't agree with what your plan was, and you hold tightly not to reality but to your plan. And then the suffering of that somehow imaginary again, that you particularly are being singled out in a particular moment of time to suffer. Why me is a central tenet of suffering. And I think this is maybe a good point where we could bring in Tolle's quote, because it's germane.
Sure. Do you want to read it?
Okay, if we all want to suffer together with me. Well, it's very simple, so I may be able to get through it without too much trouble. But Tolle's very succinct quote is, "Suffering needs time. It cannot survive in the now." And it requires a little thinking. What does he mean by suffering needs time? And what does he mean that suffering cannot survive in the now? Because the obvious pushback on the second statement is, well, of course suffering can survive in the now. It only happens. It's happening right now. I'm suffering in the now. And that's not what he means exactly.
Right. It is it's a viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take it as I am looking at this and I am suffering now, the I being defined as the ego that's speaking and has the expectations, believes that I know how this is supposed to go now. That is the underlying statement that an ego will say. I know how this is supposed to go now. It's not doing it. Whose fault is it?
Right.
It's never, wait a minute, I'm missing something. It believes it already knows. I know. That phrase shuts down any new information coming in, any changes, because I know already the way this is supposed to be.
Isn't I know sort of a denial of time?
Well, it's a belief that you dictate the rhythm and the tenet of how things are to be. And it's not what you think. This is just your thinking part, believing that I control it all. And it's blatantly not true.
Well, that brings us back to the point you mentioned in the beginning about don't believe every thought that wanders through your head.
And that is a difficult exercise, because if you notice, first of all, you have to get to a point where you're observing the thoughts that are entering into your head
versus identifying with them.
Right. You have to be able to say, oh, that thought, where did that come from? And it's like, people have said, oh, this random thought came into my head. Well, okay, where did it come from? And are you giving it voice? I think we talked last week about how various parts of you are fighting over control of the mouth. So are you going to basically speak the thought that just came into your head without checking it, without looking at it and saying, wait a minute, I don't really believe that. Where did that come from? And it's fascinating when you begin to see that, because you really begin to discern where these thoughts are coming from, whether it was something you had heard in your childhood, a phrase that pops in your head, or a random
cultural thing, something you picked up along the way,
something you saw on TV, a video or a podcast or something. It just went poop, oh. And it's very interesting when you think of that. It's like you let that thought in somehow because it's obviously there. It can't get in without you letting it in somehow. Doesn't mean that you own it. It just means that it appeared there. And that, I think, is an important issue. Do you actually own that thought? Or is this something that's random, as we say?
Like a squatter. I mean, that's it, right? But I mean, I think there's something even more sort of subtle there. And we talked about, we just said it a moment ago, but I want to say it again. Observing your thoughts. So initially, and I think you mentioned this earlier this evening, but we'll talk about it a little bit more here. You're born and you have and sort of an egoless existence for maybe the first 2 or 2.5 years of your life. And then you start to develop what's known as sort of an internal narrative. Children start to refer to themselves as I. And that is the kind of the genesis of the immature ego form. Referring to oneself as I is identifying oneself with one's thoughts. And the barrier between your being, which is what was incarnate at the moment of your birth or conception, and then matured into, let's say, your 2-year-old or so persona, and then became this, you let the thought in, let the thoughts in that gave you this sort of internal persona, who you are. Who am I? Well, I am this. Oftentimes that I am this is your being kind of crammed into a set of thoughts. I'm good, I'm bad, I'm tall, I'm short, I'm whatever, all these things. So you let these things in, and initially maybe they just were in and kind of floating around, and then somehow they coalesce and they become identifiable. You identify with them. You start to attach them a persona. I am this. That's very innocent and very natural, but it becomes sort of a monster in the sense that the thoughts organize and acquire voices, and those voices start to have conversations within your being, and you identify with one or the other of them. Mommy says this, Daddy says this, I say this, and we're all inside my head talking to each other about what Mommy says I should do, and what I want to do, and what Daddy says I should do. This, and then it goes, of course, much larger and larger, cultural and all the different things, and you acquire a whole set of sort of mishmashed thought personas, and sometimes emotion personas. They all kind of roil around in there. Margaret said they rise up. Where did it come from? It's not immediately obvious where it came from, but you did let it in at some point. It got in there. It's there now. You've identified with it, which means you've done what the Buddhists do. You kind of reached out and grabbed this thought and made it something that acquired a life of its own or a persona of its own, and you identify with that. That's me, that voice in my head, which is why, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, why it becomes so difficult not to believe those voices, because you trust me, you trust you trust yourself. You say, well, if I'm talking to me about this, it must be okay because it's me. I'm not going to say, well, stand and identify yourself, stranger. No, I'm going to say, well, that thought, whatever it is, it's in my voice with my persona, kind of persuading me to do this. People talk about an angel on the right shoulder, an angel on the left shoulder, or a devil or whatever. These voices that tell you, well, you should do this, or you shouldn't do that, they all sound like you. Well, they all sound like somebody that you know, or maybe you have an authority figure kind of relationship with. But the key here, and we have kind of gotten away from suffering, but it all is of a piece. The key here is that those voices that sound like you've identified with them. But those voices will tell you all kinds of things. What things are supposed to be, how they're supposed to go, what you're supposed to do, how this situation is going to be, how this person is going to act. And then when these things don't happen, the 401k doesn't come in and assure the insurance didn't make sure that you're all wonderful time, the doctors couldn't cure you, whatever, suffering ensues. Because all your voices rise up in this horrible cacophony and say, this should not be, It can't be. Why me? This is wrong. I shouldn't be like this. I should be like that. Why does this one have it and I don't? All these people that sound like you, these thoughts that you've let in and processed and internalized and identified with and made into a persona which you say, that's me. It's not you. It's occurring within your being because you let them in at one point or another. You gave them permission, you gave them energy, you gave them emotion, you gave them a piece of your essence. But now the inmates have taken over the asylum, Margaret. You know? One flew over the cuckoo's nest has happened.
Well, that state of madness, really, where you have so many voices going, and you haven't asserted your own consciousness as primary. And that's the interesting part. When you realize that all these other voices trying to vie for your attention, why? Because you decide. You are the most important point.
That's a very, very, very important point. You should really, that's very good.
You are the primary focus. And you have jurisdiction over all these little pieces of you that are trying to say that I'm you, I'm you, I'm you. It's like, no.
And they know it, but they don't want you to know it.
Well, I think it's not even necessarily a conscious, like, well, I want it more kind of thing. It's more like, I want this expression. Maybe that's the best way to put it. All these aspects of you are trying to find an expression because that is the experience down here. Whatever it may be that rises up in you, for example, like an emotion, you need to allow it to go through you. And in going through you, this is an expression. It doesn't mean that you allow it to take over your whole body and your voice and everything else. It means that you feel it. You feel the anger, but you don't go and start pounding into the person that made you angry. Because
you feel angry.
Yes, this is what I'm trying to express. That person made you angry in that moment, so you started pounding on them. If you feel angry and you acknowledge that this is a feeling, then you can allow it to go through you, not possess you. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Okay? It is primary to be able to do that type of discernment, knowing when you're allowing the emotion to take you over and you become the emotion, or you're allowing yourself to feel it and not allow it to possess you. And that distinction is so very important for your own internal well-being. Because when you are overtaken by something, you're overwhelmed by something, it's not good. It's not good for all of you, not just your emotional body or your mental state, but your physical body as well, because the physical body will wind up holding this overload of energy without a place for it to be expressed. So coming to the point of balance that way is always very important. Understanding when you are not in that peaceful point. This is what Jesus meant by being able to walk through the fires of hell and still be at total peace because He is within you. It is understanding that you feel all this, but you don't choose to be dominated by this. You walk through it as a consciousness that is pure and grounded in the spirit of who you are. And who you are is more than what you think and what you feel and how you appear. But living that way, you need the spirit interaction in order to hold that perspective. It takes tremendous strength to be able to hold that, but your consciousness is well capable of it if you give yourself the permission. Because you choose in that very moment of the present to say, I see what's going on. I hold my perspective. I may not like it. It may hurt. You may have a reaction, a physical reaction, but you also know that this is not a loss of consciousness. In fact, if anything, it is an anchoring into your eternal consciousness.
Well, there's a lot there, but all this that you just said is surrounding the central question here, which is that the suffering, which we started off at the beginning of this show with, the suffering in this place is not intrinsic to what we're doing here. The suffering, however, comes from what Margaret was just talking about, the fact that if you, in an unconscious way, identify with these personae within you, when you are walking through hell, or when you encounter something which goes against your expectations, you have that moment of time. You have that moment of time when you can choose not to identify and not to suffer. What Tolle is talking about is that the suffering, the actual thing that's going to drag you out of your consciousness and into this existence that Buddha was talking about, where all life is suffering. It's all life is suffering if you choose to go into it, and if you choose to, in essence, live in a suffering way. The suffering that happens here is almost exclusively a product, not of circumstance, but of how you react to circumstance. And your reaction, when it's guided by the unconscious or by the identification with all these thoughts that come into your head, what should be, what shouldn't be, why should it be, why can't it be, all those things, they all drive you into suffering. This isn't to say that physical things don't happen to you. Bad things happen to everybody. But your ego personae, all these little voices in your head say, no, you're special. You're being singled out. You're being unjustly made to suffer. And the key is the unjustly made to suffer. And then those people over there, they deserve to suffer. I know that I'm good, and I know that they're bad. So why am I being chosen to suffer when these people over here should be obviously made to suffer? And I should be obviously not made to suffer. I am good. I am pure. I'm the person who obviously is the best person in the world. All this is where suffering actually resides. It resides in your literal identification with personae and expectations and thoughts, not letting them be expressed as a feeling or used as a thought, but being identified with, I am this thought, I am this feeling, I am angry, I am expecting to be served, or expecting that this go this way or this go that way. I am very important. That's a big thought for many people. I'm very important, so you shouldn't be doing this to me because that's making me suffer. No. You choose these things. You put your hand on your emotion and identify with it and be angry. You put your hand on a thought and identify with it and say, I am important. And when you do that, you are choosing suffering, choosing to suffer, and doing what Talia mentioned in the very beginning, Margaret, which is suffering needs time. You're giving time. You're taking yourself from the present moment of now and giving time to your suffering. You're literally attaching yourself, and this is, again, Buddhist, because attachment is all about suffering too. You're attaching yourself to the suffering. You're attaching yourself to the world, attaching your being, which is vast, to that which is small and ephemeral, and literally form, which is never going to be anything but, a transient. You're attaching yourself to those things and suffering with them, choosing to suffer, choosing it.
You're choosing your experience, and maybe that needs the clarification. When you choose to want the conflict, in other words, you feel that this is wrong and it's got to get corrected right now, and I'm going to be the one that's going to do something about it. Or somebody should do something about that.
Somebody should.
Yeah, that's choosing the conflict. Because that kind of viewpoint usually happens when circumstances that are outside of your control have brought you to a point where you have very little control. So then somebody ought to do something. It's understanding that. It's accepting the fact that, you are not in control. And the common attitude of modern society is, well, as long as you organize it all, you can control it all, which is absurd.
It's the mantra of almost every advertisement you've ever seen, is that somehow doing this, whatever the thing is that they're trying to sell you, will give you control.
It will give you control. It will keep you away from that feeling of fear. I remember one time, this is when after we had lost Chris, they were doing these random phone calls. And for some reason, they had gotten my number and asked, they were trying to sell me insurance. On the wrong person.
That didn't go well, did it?
Well, the gentleman there was like, oh, you can, what is that called now? Where you're taking a, not really a loan, but the potential of a loan against your house. You're borrowing on
its equity.
Equity, yes, an equity loan.
Yes.
And he was trying to convince me that I should go for this because, you never know what's going to happen. If you suddenly get sick and, there's so many bills to pay, you can use the equity to pay off your bills. And I let him just go on and give me the spiel because I knew there was no stopping it. I had to wait for a break point.
Right, you were letting him suffer.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah. So after he gave me his pitch, I said, do people actually believe that?
You should have known right then to hang up.
And he went, well, there's these random... And I said, no. Do people really believe that your equity will be able to pay all your medical bills? And at that point, I heard him switch from the handset to the
from the speaker
to the speakerphone.
To the speakerphone, okay.
Because I think he was basically gesturing to other people in the room. You got to hear this. And I could hear movement in the background. Okay.
Scurry.
So I said to him, do you know how much it is for 1 week in the hospital? Do you really know? Well, no. Well, a week in the hospital, 60,000. What? Do you know how much it is for a month?
Yeah.
I was like, so you think your equity loan is going to cover all of that, especially if you have a chronic illness? And they were just flabbergasted that suddenly they were having a real conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
It's like, that's an illusion.
Well, we had been broken at that point. We were outside of... We had gone outside the illusion, so far outside that going back in was painful.
It's just unacceptable.
And unacceptable.
It's not. That's not the reality I know. I can't step into your illusion anymore. And there have been many incidences where you begin to see the stories that people are telling other people to manipulate them in some way or to influence them. Maybe, like the influencers. Everybody knows what influencers are. Other people over whatever the subject may be. But we had such a reality check of what life and death is. And it's not insurance. And it shows how deep or deeply a person just thinks about, oh, well, if I get insurance, because they don't want to think about death or sickness. Oh, yeah, that'll be a nice insurance if I have the equity loan. And it's like, it's all bullshit.
Well, it is, of course, but to abstract that a little bit, again, this you put the hammer or the nail on the you put whatever that thing is, you hit the nail on the head, which is to say that the fear of suffering is used as a manipulator, and what they sell to people is the illusion of control. That if you do this and this and this, then you won't suffer. You'll be ready. You'll be prepared. You'll control. In essence, it really is saying that if you do this, it won't happen to you. If you have all the right insurances and you have all the things, you won't suffer. You'll be ready and prepared, and you'll have what you need, and there'll be no problems. And it is BS. And the key though is again that when they're selling this stuff to people, they're doing it as a way of assuaging this future fear. So again, it's never in the moment of now. It's talking about the future. This could happen. That could happen. All these fears are risen up. They're used as a motivator. Don't want this to happen. You don't want to not have the money for the rainy day kind of thing. Take the equity loan. Okay. It doesn't matter the specifics. The point is the fear of the future. You're looking towards potential suffering. And then in the past, when you're looking backward, it's all the suffering of regret. Oh, if it only had done this. Oh, if that had only happened. Suffering always occurs not in the present moment of now. And this is what Tolle is prosecuting. Suffering needs time, but it can't survive in the now. And you say to yourself, what does that really mean? It cannot survive in the now, but it needs time. He's using time and now in different ways. People think of them as the same thing. Well, now it's this time. Now it's 3 o'clock. Now it's 3:01. Now it's 3:02. See? Now. No. The time Tolle's talking about here is that suffering needs ego time. Ego time is the future. Ego time is the past. Ego time is worrying about the future and regretting the past. It's saying it should be this way, and why isn't it that way, and how come me, and why not them? And I'm angry, and I'm afraid, and I want someone to do something about it. And they got to do it now, and I'm not happy right here now. I want to be over there where that happiness is. And if only I have all these things, and I do all the stuff on my bucket list, I'll be complete and happy and fulfilled. If only I can find the person with all these different characteristics. I know they're out there somewhere, but then they'll complete me. This is every one of those things is rooted, deeply entrenched in suffering.
Or fear of.
our fear of, it's all suffering. Where is suffering not? Suffering when you're lying in your bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and worrying about the future, that's suffering. Suffering when you're looking back over your past life and saying, where is the meaning in all this? Where did I go wrong? Why am I not this? Why am I not that? Suffering. You know where suffering is never? Never in the moment of now. And we learned that. We were taught that. We were broken through that with Christopher, because the moment of now, from any measure of future or past, was an immolating fire. We were walking through hell, but we found, and Christopher found, that in the moment of now, it just didn't matter. He said it maybe first, or he said it best. It's only pain. He said that. He was 6 or 7. And that's important. But it's also in the moment of now, even when you're under the shadow of the valley of the shadow of death, you can fear no evil. This is wonderful, lovely, poetic words. Because why? Because in the moment of now, evil cannot touch you. Evil can only get to you through the future or the past. In the moment of now, you choose your reaction, and you choose joy. You choose not to suffer, because you're not special.
Well, the phrasing is walking through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me.
Oh, fear no evil.
Yes. Because that connection, your spirit, is connected to the divine spirit.
The eternal.
And when your perspective is from the eternal, you realize how ephemeral, how misty, but insignificant this moment is. And you realize, well, this is just something I have to walk through. Yes, this is only pain. It's only pain, Mom. Yes, I understand that. But
I didn't till now, or till much later. But yeah, he did.
Yes, he did, because he walked through it. Observing someone walking through this is not the same as you walking it yourself. You have to give yourself that piece of knowledge and understand what it means. There is always something that you will learn, but when you're really walking in it, and you have let go of all the stories and all what you thought you knew, and just opened yourself to what is unfolding in this moment, perceiving it as it is, and understanding that no matter what, life is beautiful. I may be in hell right now, but life itself is truly amazing. And that was something that we mothers used to talk about when we were in the pediatric wards of Memorial Sloan Kettering. We were always amazed when some news article would come up and some type of crazy death was going on. Like when that thing with Waco happened, and suddenly that whole enclave was just, everything got destroyed and killed, and all of us are just standing there. Our mothers are like, why? You're all healthy. Why are you choosing this? Why is this why is this when you can take another choice? And these are from families that have no choice. They've got to do it this way. But if you have a choice to choose life, oh my God, that's a gift. That's a gift. So, basic questions, stories that we tell ourselves. There are many, many, many. And I think I've related this to you before when Christopher asked, a 5-year-old asking, Mommy, what is death? All the stories about these notions of what adults believe death is and how you're not supposed to talk about it. You might upset somebody. It brings up a lot of fear. You don't want to trigger fear in people, or you don't want to upset people. And you're talking about a consciousness that has none of that. None of that as a foundation of death. He's asking, what really is death? Without all the stories.
You wanted a real answer.
So you have to go deep inside and ask, okay, what answer can I give him that doesn't have all these sticky fingers on it, all these awful stories? Because whatever is going to come through my mouth, he's going to take in and he's going to use as a building block for how he's going to handle his situation. Do you really want to give him the burden of your fear that he may die? No. If you truly love your children, you realize that they've got to walk their path on their own and honor that. Not give them all these preconceived notions and your fear, because this is your fear. It's not his fear. So that's when Grace came in and gave him a clean answer. A clean answer. That it doesn't... Is there a succinct way of ending this?
Well, the clean answer is, the point is that there are a lot of answers you could have given him, and you mentioned some of them, and a lot of those answers are just wrapped up in future fear or in past regret. Oh, and the fear that I went through with feeling about my own mortality, or the regret I have for this one passed and that one passed, and all the fears that were given to me. No, navigating those waters is an exercise in the moment of now. In essence, suffering is all around. When you bring up subjects like that, when you bring up subjects that have to do with real things that break, things that are destroyed, things that really matter, things like death, and yet you have the opportunity in that moment to not choose the well-worn path, the thoughts that were put inside you, the fears, the regrets, the don't talk about this, don't talk about that, the it should be this one, it should be that one. Those are all the thoughts that were put inside you. In that moment, Margaret, and this is something you have to take credit for, because very many people, I would say most people, wouldn't have known what to do with that answer and would have just given this essential existential question asked by somebody who was really asking because they really didn't know and they wanted to know. And it wasn't idle curiosity. It was, I need to know this because I could be going through this very soon. You give me something that I can really use, an actual piece of information. And fear would have you say, no, he's too young for this. We can't tell him that. And all the suffering that would come from that.
Yeah, that's
and you navigated your way around it, and you have to say to yourself, you have to give yourself credit that is grace. Because giving the clean answer, and it would be different for every child and different for every situation, is an exercise in eschewing the ego, the time that the ego wants. No, it's not the right time. We can't say this now. It has to be that. It has to be this. Why me? Why am I in this situation? Why do I have to answer these questions? Why my child? All those things, all that stuff can rise up in a cloud and say, all these voices in your head are screaming from every direction. Don't say this, don't say that. Who gets the mouth? No, nobody got the mouth. All had to sit down. They all had to shut up. You open yourself to grace. What is that? You connect to the eternal, and you ask, in a being state, what can I tell this being about the ephemeral nature of our existence here, about the fact that this is only form, and that the analogy of a house that you can fix for a while, but eventually you can't fix it anymore, is more than perfect. We put this in Christopher's book. And it's more than perfect. Why? Because that's what we are. And if you look directly into many, many different revelations, Scripture is a great place to look, but there are many other places. The house of your spirit is your body. Don't make it a whited sepulcher. Don't make it something which looks perfect on the outside, which is full of corruption and death on the inside. Realize that this is just a temporary thing. It's just a form. It comes and it goes. To hold on to it is to engender suffering. But to say that it's just a house that we can fix for a while, and after a while you can't fix it anymore, and then you just go live somewhere else. Who's the being there? The being is dwelling in the house. The house is not the being. And it's saying that to a 5-year-old and saying, you're not a house. Your body is not you. You're not all these fears or all these expectations or what you're suffering or what you're not suffering. None of those things. You just said you're you. And after a while, if the form can't be repaired, you just go to another place. Well, that's just nigh short of perfect. And it went right in. And Christopher, we said in the book he was content with the answer, but he wasn't the kind of person that was content with that sort of stuff. You couldn't just give him a pat answer. Everyone knows somebody like that. They look at you and go, that's crap. Christopher would just say, that's crap in so many words. Because if you don't give an answer with heart and with spirit in it and with actual life, the words don't matter, but the energy behind them does. If you gave him a crap answer, he'd say, that's crap. He was very discerning as a person. We all know people like that. They're insightful by nature. They know people. They know when something's crap. These people generally have very clear sight, and they grow up to be very discerning people. But they are, even in their childhood, they're discerning. That's who they are. Giving him that answer and letting him say, yeah, that makes sense. What is death? Death is moving out of a house that's falling down and can't be repaired anymore.
Then you go on to a better house.
But exactly. A different house. Mm-hmm. Another house. Right. It's still a house.
Right.
It's so subtle and so good. You have to take credit for that. And suffering would be saying that, oh gosh, we just have to do something. We're going to do everything we can. We're going to try and fix the house no matter what. And if the house falls down, we'll be so sad. That's all suffering. Because then
the violins are playing in the background.
Well, then you're the house. Or you're saying, no, we can't talk about that. No, the house is always going to be there. It's always going to be perfect. That's all fear. It's all suffering. Just saying you're not the house. Guess what? You're you. You're vast. You're infinite. You're not the house. The house is going to fall down. Everybody's house falls down. Everyone's. This is what made it a clean answer, and why it gave him something that he could hold on to in a 5-year-old child state, and it spoke to the eternal, ageless part of him that knew it was true. That's what I mean by discerning. Mm-hmm. When something beats true into a discerning person's, it's touching their heart. We always say that. That's the language. If you touch someone's heart, it's true. The true heart touch of saying that answer was getting around the suffering that needs time. Because time is where form takes place. Time is where form falls apart. Time is where form decays. In the now, none of that happens.
Right. Well, this is... in that moment, a lot of people would have, I know other people who would have started talking about their particular religion.
Yes.
And saying, well, when you die, this is going to happen. And so many variations of whatever. And trying to explain that to a child, I think, is a moot point. Because it's at that point they can see that's a construct.
Yes.
This is a story that you're putting together. And it's something that you don't understand. The one thing that a person who is living in the moment can discern is whether or not you truly understand or have a heartfelt revelation on the subject, whatever it may be, however the question was posed. They know that they test the answer to a, how do I say this?
For honesty.
Yes, but it's a truth.
Truth. Yeah.
A truth meter almost on how if it's true, it's true.
We say it rings true.
Yes, that rings true. And children have that automatically. They know that when they're little like that, they begin to understand when an adult is giving them a story to just try to get them to do what they want them to do.
Right.
And every person has that gauge.
Yes.
Every one of us has that gauge. You know when you're being given a story. The language also presents that. Given a story, we know what that phrase means. But what is true rings true, and you just go, oh, yes, yes. So, kernels of truth are what we all search for, and we take those in to heart, and they're very precious to us, because we know that this cannot be altered truth. It's not a relative thing. Relative truth is those stories, okay? And that's manipulation in some way, shape, or form to herd you into a certain response. Humans know when that happens, especially little humans. And we are all looking for those kernels of truth to be able to hold and live our lives by, because we know it does not change. When you live your life by those internal truths you've taken in, nothing can sway you. Nothing.
Well, and isn't that correct? You know, the relative truths, I like that. You know, that's a really wonderful phrase, because they're not necessarily lies. They're true in a sense, but you know it's a construct. It's a form.
Yep.
It's an echo of truth, perhaps. In other words, it's not something that's an outright lie, but yet it's being used as a manipulation. It's like when somebody tries to sell you insurance. Well, insurance, yes, insurance has a utility, but what they're really trying to sell you is an illusion, right?
Right.
So the illusion part of it is a form which will fade and which will decay and which will
vapor. There's no
vapor.
Substance to it.
The heart true is we all are not special in this incarnation. We all will at one time or another undergo suffering. But in the moment of now, you get to decide about your reaction to that. And if your reaction is, this is what is. If I cannot do anything about it, I have to accept it. When you're a child with a discerning heart, this is who you are. You're incarnated, but you have a discerning heart. You're an old soul, as some people say. You can pierce these illusory, these relative truths so easily. And Christopher did it all the time. When people would tell him things and he said, that's not true, he just wouldn't act on it, because that was his nature. Not every child is like that, but we all know people like that. You can't lie to them because they just go, that's bullshit. George Carlin, that's bullshit. You know, the 7 words you can't say on TV or whatever the heck it is. But the point is people like that. But Margaret is correct too. We all have that. We just lie to ourselves. We put our ego forms on top of it and pile them on enough that we kind of say, oh yeah, all right, I'll live with the falseness. But when it rings true, it's resonant. The ringing part of rings true is the resonance that you get when you feel that this is an eternal truth. It rings past the existence, the form, into that which is eternal. This is true. We are not the house.
Right. And truth is the only thing that can survive in the now.
Yes.
Okay. So when you allow certain things into you, like the thoughts that come in, is like, where did that thought come from? Your exposure. There are, I believe, 7 gates into your body.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I believe that's Buddhist or Hindu, but it's more than that. It's 7 gates, meaning that ways that things come into you. So you take things in through your ears and your eyes and your mouth and your nose, and taking them in. People don't realize that you really should screen things that you are taking in, because not everything you take in is good for you. And when you have that random thought that comes up that says something that you're looking at it going, where did that come from? You have to realize that you took that in through some gate that you were unconscious of. You unconsciously took that in. And that is something that the ego likes to grab hold of, because the fact that you took it in means that, okay, this is like a handle I can manipulate the consciousness with in order for it to pay attention to me, because I'm going to use this as a way of grabbing control. Yes.
To the most important thing to all the ego needs, which is you, the being. And
so acknowledging that you must be aware, because when you are aware, you are in the now. And being in the now dissipates it all. It means that you are aware and conscious, and you're at that choice point of which way you're going to go.
Well, and your statement before is the best, is that suffering can't survive in the now, but truth can. And as somebody once said, the truth can set you free. But the truth, the reality in the moment of now, is the only thing that actually is. All the suffering is grasped and sometimes sneaks in through a gate.
Right. Do not engage.
Do not engage.
And we have reached the end of our hour.
But you suffered through it with us.
Commendable. So I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And thank you for listening.